becoming a problem, but it's difficult to cover everything into one kind of presentation. So I'm going to expose the students how to approach a congenital heart disease in adults based on a case. Okay. So which of the following is the commonest congenital heart disease seen in adults? If this question is put, most of the time I have seen many students selecting other answers, but the answer is ASD. Okay. CHD in adults, 1 in 150 adults live with congenital heart disease. So it's not that uncommon. Most would have received treatment when they were young, often in infancy. So this is going to be a situation maybe in another 10-15 years. Right now, still many are untreated, or we do come across many untreated individuals. Rarely people go undetected until much later in life. Now, this is how the longevity following surgery of tetralogy of Fallot, ASD, coarctation, things like that. The 30-year longevity is as high as 75 to 80%. So that means majority are going to live as an adults, and we should know how to manage the problems that can occur when these children become adults. So leave that part because that's going to be a separate topic on its own. Now I'm going to take these students to the common examination or the common case which they are going to face in the examination. So this is Trivandrum, December 2001. This was my one of the 4 cases for our final DM examination. The examinations were Professor Manchanda of All India Institute of Medical Sciences and Professor Jacob Jose of CMC Vellore. Okay, history goes like this. It's a 44-year-old lady told to have some heart problem at the age of 5 years, but no intervention was advised. It was a clinical diagnosis, no echo imaging was done. You can imagine that probably 30 years back or 40 years back, there was no good echo machine, there was no good echocardiography to give a very accurate diagnosis. The most of the diagnosis was depending on the CAT study. Now, no medication was prescribed. She was asked for a 2 yearly follow-up, which she did not follow. So just simply left it. No history of respiratory infection or no history of recurrent respiratory infection in the childhood. Now, for the past 8 years, she has been having dyspnea and exertion, which gradually worsened to class 3 for the past few months. History of effort-induced palpitations present. No history of sudden onset or offset of the palpitations. No chest pain, no giddiness or syncope. History of easy fatigability present. No history of cyanosis. Now, she was re-evaluated 8 years ago, told to have some hole in the heart. Started on medications. Again, no intervention was advised. So as a child, she was told to have some problem. 8 years back, she was told to have some hole in the heart. Started on medications. Again, no intervention was advised. No hospitalization so far. No other significant past history. She is not on treatment for systemic hypertension or diabetes. We should remember, when our patient says hole, it could be a valvular problem. When the patient says valve problem, it could be a septal defect. So let us not go exactly by whatever the patient says in his or her own local vernacular. So analyzing the history, this lady has heart disease from childhood, but symptomatic 5 past 8 years only and on medical management. Though there was a heart disease from childhood, symptomatic 5 past 8 years and on medical management. Probably it was related to the worsening of a congenital heart disease, which is causing symptoms. However, for some reason, surgery or intervention is not possible now, and because of that, she is kept on medical management. So this is one analysis of the history. What can be the other analysis? Heart disease known from childhood, but it was probably insignificant lesion. Now, a new disease has come, which is causing symptoms unrelated to the congenital heart disease. So this is also possible. However, here we are considering 2 different diagnoses, which we should avoid in general. We should try to put one diagnosis, putting everything together, but both the things are possible. So this should be the analysis of the history. Now, how do we categorize the congenital heart disease? Okay, so DTGA, TAPVC, they form a very severe form of congenital heart disease. Admixture physiology, top physiology, left to right shunts, and valvular pathologies. So in DTGA, more than 90% die by 1 year. Rarely, survival to second decade is possible with a large AST. Suppose the child is born with a large AST, without surgery, they can escape into second decade. So very rarely in a second decade, you can come across a child with or a patient with DTGA. You know, come here, look here. From the right ventricle, the aorta is arising, and from the left ventricle, pulmonary artery is arising. Okay. In arterial switch operation, they will switch the great arteries. But before that, what we were doing atrial switch operation. That is, we'll direct the SVC and IVC blood into the left ventricle, and we will direct the pulmonary venous blood into the right ventricle. They are called, it is Senning's operation or mustard operation. Now come to this example. When I was at Amrita, I came across a 32-year-old lady with transmission of great arteries. And how was that possible? That lady had TAPVC to right atrium. That means all the pulmonary veins were draining to right atrium. That means congenitally mustard operation was done by the God. I'm just giving you so that you will understand the pathophysiology. Understanding congenital disease is nothing but understanding the hemodynamics. If you understand the hemodynamics and the natural history of the lesion, then you can always explain any symptom of any given patient. So this is not possible in our case. We are not going to consider DTG in this lady. Now, admixture physiology, single ventricle, tricuspid atresia, complex DORE, mitral atresia, all these come under admixture physiology. They also have high mortality in the first year of life, and they have very early ease in minimalization without any surgical intervention. For example, if you're a single ventricle patient, child, if he doesn't undergo PA band by 3 to 4 months, as early as 7 to 8 months, he may become inoperable. That means even a simple PA band he will not tolerate, and majority will die before 2 years. So we are not going to consider an unoperated admixture physiology in our case. What about tetralogy of Fallot? So we have classical TOF. We have VSD pulmonary atresia, which is also an extreme form of TOF. And we have all admixture lesions. If they have pulmonary stenosis, they have TOF physiology. So what are the examples I showed here? If these examples, if they have pulmonary stenosis, significant enough to make the PA pressure to near normal, then they can survive into adult, what we call as TOF physiology. So it's all possible in our case. And you can always question, there is no history of cyanosis. So is it possible? Yes, it's possible. It could be a pink TOF. In pink TOF, the cyanosis may not be noticed by the patient, and only we will be noticing, or many times we ourselves may not notice. When we detect, when you check the saturation, it will be less than 95%. So this is very much possible in our case. What about left to right shunts? All large shunts, say large post tricuspid shunts, large VSD, large AP window, large PDA, all of them are invariably symptomatic in the infancy. And most of them, either they undergo surgery or they develop some complication and die subsequently, or the size will come down in size. So one of the three should occur: a large VSD or large AP window. Either they should develop some narrowing of the defect, which is not possible in AP window, or they should get operated. But this is possible in our case if it is a small to moderate VSD, small to moderate PDA, small to moderate AP window. Even large AST is possible, isn't it? So among the shunts, the pre-tricuspid shunt large AST will remain asymptomatic or can remain asymptomatic even in a patient with 30 or 35 years. So this left to right shunt is very much possible in our case. Valvular pathologies, all valvular pathologies are possible. A mild pulmonary stenosis would have been in 5 years, now it is severe pulmonary stenosis. It would have been a bicuspid aortic valve in mild aortic stenosis, which is now severe aortic stenosis or aortic regurgitation. It could have been a mitral prolapse with mild mitral regurgitation, now it would have become a moderate or severe regurgitation. So all these things are possible in our case. So all these miscellaneous conditions, corrected transmission of great arteries, Epstein's anomaly, coarctation of aorta, peripheral PS, sinus of valvular aneurysm, all these are possible. So I am not listing out just because to list out the possibilities, but we should have it in mind. Now here, one important point is that the patient has not been advised for surgery even after re-evaluation in the adulthood. Based on that, we are going to narrow down our possibilities subsequently. Okay. Anyway, what I am telling you, I am bringing out the lesions where survival into adulthood is possible. Other rare causes, pulmonary fistula or systemic veins draining to LA, all these things are possible because all these patients we have seen as adults. Now, what is the reason for worsening of heart lesion? A heart lesion which was asymptomatic, why should it worsen? Even if it is a small VSD, if it develops infected endocarditis, patient will develop symptoms. the patient can develop arrhythmias. Say large aged asymptomatic, they develop arrhythmia, they become very much symptomatic and develop heart failure. Heart failure can occur due to any of the other reasons or because of the worsening of the valvular lesions, or there could be development of pulmonary hypertension, like development of Eisenmenger syndrome. So these are the reasons of worsening of the heart lesion. Now let us go further. Now I said all these things are possible. Small to large AST, small to moderate VST, small to moderate PDA, small to moderate AF. But what is the cause of symptom? We should find out some reason for cause of symptom. And we cannot easily explain some cause of symptom unless, as I said, it's going to be, for example, a small VST developing aortic regurgitation, or one of these things developing infected endocarditis. But if all these things have occurred, generally some surgery should have been advised in this lady, isn't it? It was not advised. So we are not very clear why, despite all these things, why surgery was not advised. But still it is possible. Let us have it in mind. Now, classical TOF, no history of cyanosis, but it could be a pink TOF. So all admission lesions with PS, TOF physiology, yes, very much possible. Now, this lady being a pink TOF is very much is possible. But why surgery is not advised? You know, for classical TOF, even in adults, surgery can be relatively done with relative ease. But for a complex TOF, many times surgery may not yield a good result. If you go with the benefit versus risk, or if you follow the natural history of the particular lesion, leaving the patient medically may be good enough rather than subjecting the patient for a complex intracardiac repair and either causing mortality or significant morbidity. So a complex TOF is very much possible. Okay, so let us have it in mind. Now, pulmonary stenosis, aortic stenosis, ME with mitral regurgitation, all these things has, if we consider that they have worsened and causing symptoms, definitely surgery should have been advised, isn't it? Either transcatheter intervention or surgery should have been advised. Here, surgery was not advised. So these possibilities become very less likely. Okay, this possibility is very much there. This possibility is possible, but these possibilities are very much less likely. And what about all these things? Corrected TGA, Epstein's anomaly, coarctation, peripheral place, sinus of valsalva aneurysm. Now here, corrected TGA, yes, possible. Epstein's anomaly, yes, possible. But coarctation, we would advise surgery. So going by that point, that because surgery has not been advised, I am ruling out coarctation of aorta also. I am also ruling out sinus of valsalva aneurysm. There is no such sinus of valsalva aneurysm where you simply keep the patient under medical management, especially when they are symptomatic. Okay. So in spite of symptomatic, if I am keeping a patient for medical management, it could be a complex Epstein's anomaly where, as I said, surgery may not be easy. It could be a complex corrected transposition of great arteries where the only option could be cardiac transplantation. So let us have all these possibilities, whatever I have listed. Of course, Eisenmenger syndrome. Okay, at this age, 40, 45 years, one of the common congenital heart disease, unoperated congenital heart disease, one should always consider is Eisenmenger syndrome. And so after deleting all those possibilities which are very less likely, now we are left with large left reaction, which is an inoperable status. Okay, a large left reaction, which is an inoperable status, number one. Number two, complex TOF. Number three, corrected TGA. Number four, Epstein's anomaly and Eisenmenger syndrome. Of course, the Eisenmenger syndrome and the large left reaction are interrelated. Okay, so these are the possibilities going by the history. Now, on examination, it was a normal bill, comfortable at rest, heart rate 80 per minute, BP 116 by 80, no significant difference between the limbs, mild cyanosis involving all the limbs, no differential involvement. JVP was seen just above the clavicle, prominent A waves were seen, it was regular, there was no pedal edema. Now, cardiovascular examination, the apex was 1 centimeter lateral to the mid-clavicle line, RV type, parasternal heave present. The PA pulsations were palpable in the left second space. Second sound was palpable. There was no thrill palpable. First sound was normal. Second sound was wide and fixed. P2 was greater than A2. There was a loud, superficial, early diastolic murmur lasting up to 50% of the diastole in the second space, and there was no other murmur. Okay, so the findings were very classical. Patient has cyanosis. JVP shows prominent A wave indicating high RA pressure, wide fixed second sound, and features of severe pulmonary hypertension. So with these findings, what comes to our mind as a first diagnosis is, I put the same now. Is it a complex TOF? No. Is it a corrected TGA? No. Is it a Epstein's anomaly? No. Because so much of features of pulmonary hypertension is there. None of these things will have pulmonary hypertension as a cause. So to connect the left to right shunt and pulmonary hypertension, it boils down to Eisenmenger syndrome. Okay, so my clinical diagnosis was Eisenmenger syndrome, large atrial septal defect, sinus rhythm, not in failure. Now, they asked, do you have a differential diagnosis? I was very hesitant. What differential diagnosis can I do? I said, no, I don't have any differential diagnosis. Now, when it comes to Eisenmenger syndrome, it could be pre-tricuspid stents or it could be post-tricuspid stents. Rarely a truncus arteriosus and admixture lesions also can present with Eisenmenger syndrome. Now, in VSD, you please understand, there is severe pulmonary hypertension since birth. I have seen that PGs or even some of my colleagues using the term called, this VSD will develop pulmonary hypertension. A VSD will not develop pulmonary hypertension. It is born with pulmonary hypertension. The RV pressure cannot be lesser than left ventricle because both are connected to the large communication. So in large VSD, the PA systolic pressure and the aortic systolic pressure are identical from birth, unless the VSD is closed. Okay. So because PVR is normal, there is large left to right shunt in infancy. There will be LA and LV volume overloaded, resulting in cardiomegaly, and the child will present with heart failure. Left to right shunt decreases with gradual increase in the pulmonary vascular resistance. The LA and LV volume decreases correspondingly and normalizes with time. So because of the increase in PVR, the left to right shunt decreases, the LA and LV decreases in time. The PA pressure can never become suprasystemic. This is another important thing you have to understand. Because RV and LV are connected with one big hole, PA pressure can at best be maximum can go up to only systemic. Because the LA LV were earlier enlarged, now that the shunt has become negligible, the LA LV become normal. So there is no ventricular enlargement. The precardium will be quiet in this in that particular patient who has a large VSD and developing Eisenmenger syndrome. There will be no LV or RV failure. Both ventricles face both circulations with same timings. P2 becomes single. There won't be any murmur. Rarely, early diastolic murmur of PR can be here. So these are the features of VSD with Eisenmenger syndrome. History of repeated respiratory infections in the childhood is only rarely present. I am seeing that somebody insists whether there is history of repeated respiratory infections to say that there was large left right in VSD. And the answer is no. This small, unfortunate group of children, they develop changes of Eisenmengerization or the pulmonary vascular resistance worsening happens as early as in the second or third year. So they do not have very definite history of respiratory infections. And absence of recurrent respiratory infection in childhood does not take away the diagnosis of large ventricular septal defect. Now, what about ASD? The PA pressure normalizes in 1 to 2 months' time totally. And then the left to right shunt establishes, and there will be RV enlargement due to volume overload. There will be a long asymptomatic period. The symptoms of dyspnea secondary to increase in the shunt or PAs can occur later. Because, say, a 14 millimeter, 15 millimeter ASD, the shunt may be 1.5 or 2:1 shunt, but the patient may be asymptomatic. The same person, when he becomes 45, 50 years old, either develops systemic hypertension or because of the age-related increase in the left ventricular end-diastolic pressure, there will be increased left-right shunt. Now, the same 16 millimeter ASD will have 3:1 shunt and he will become symptomatic. Okay, so the same hole will become or will start shunting more when the age increases, or if the patient develops pulmonary vascular disease, they will develop symptoms. Now, what happens? That there is gradual reduction in the left to right shunt as happens in the VSD, but the size of the RA and RV, they do not come down as the volume overload is replaced by the pressure overload. Cardiomegaly persists or even worsens. Wide and fixed S2 persist. The ejection systolic murmur will disappear. The ejection systolic murmur will be there when there was a good antegrade flow. Now it disappears. Rather, early diastolic murmur of pulmonary regurgitation or pansystolic murmur of tricuspid regurgitation could appear. So this is the difference between VSD and ASD. So second sound widely split and loud P2 in pre-tricuspid shunt, whereas single and loud in the post-tricuspid shunt. Right ventricle he is usually seen because RV can be suprasystemic in Eisenmenger syndrome secondary to ASD, whereas in VSD is uncommon. So the clinically, these two cannot be kept as a differential diagnosis. You cannot keep a differential diagnosis of ASD Eisenmenger syndrome and also VSD Eisenmenger syndrome. You can give a DD of VSD Eisenmenger syndrome and something else, ASD Eisenmenger syndrome and something else. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, pre-tricuspid shunt Eisenmenger syndrome, post-tricuspid shunt Eisenmenger syndrome. So I said, no, sir, I can't consider other shunts causing Eisenmenger syndrome. Okay. Then what is the most next useful investigation they asked me? I just kept it. I do know the answer is echo. But obviously they are going to give me ECG, X-ray and read. I just kept quiet. So they gave the choice. What do you want? ECG, chest X-ray, echo. So I jumped and said echo because the answer is going to be there on the face. Echo showed a 12 millimeter ostium secondum AST with a bidirectional flow. The right ventricular systolic pressure was 110 millimeters of mercury. Now what's the diagnosis? Now this is baffling. See, for the AST to develop Eisenmenger syndrome, it has to be large. It has to be more than 30 millimeters. In original Paulwood series, it was more than 30 millimeters. The echo finding is not suggestive of AST with Eisenmenger syndrome. So I was just kept quiet for some time. Now they asked me, would you like to see the chest X-ray now? I said yes. Okay, then show the X-ray. So in chest X-ray, let me show the X-ray directly. These are the X-rays of large AST with Eisenmenger syndrome. See, the cardiomegaly is invariably there. If there is no cardiomegaly, you should not diagnose AST Eisenmenger syndrome. There's a large heart. There is dilated pulmonary artery. Behind the pulmonary artery, you can see the dilated left pulmonary artery, right pulmonary artery, but the pulmonary blood flow is reduced. Here, it appears that very huge heart and there is a very large end and view of the pulmonary arteries. Both are very classical X-rays of AST Eisenmenger syndrome. What about this one? These are the two X-rays of VST Eisenmenger syndrome. There is no cardiomegaly. The only telltale evidence is that there is some pulmonary artery enlargement and RP enlargement is there. Here, even the RP enlargement is not that prominent, only pulmonary artery enlargement is there. Pulmonary blood flow is normal or slightly reduced. So these are the examples of classical examples of VST Eisenmenger syndrome. So if somebody gives you an X-ray, it's very easy to differentiate between the two. So I asked for the X-ray, and obviously I don't have the X-ray what was shown to me. The X-ray was something like this. So definitely I'm not going to diagnose AST Eisenmenger syndrome here. This X-ray is very typical of a primary pulmonary hypertension. That means absence of cardiomegaly, there is prominent pulmonary artery. That's all will be there. And you won't have any significant findings in the lungs. So this X-ray is quite typical of primary pulmonary hypertension. This is not typical of AST Eisenmenger syndrome. So they asked, do you want to revise your diagnosis? I said, yes. It is severe pulmonary hypertension, probably primary pulmonary hypertension. There is underlying atrial septal defect with bidirectional flow, as you showed in the echo, and also clinically there is wide fixed second sound. And they asked me, why didn't you consider earlier? I said, she has been giving this history of 8 years. She was diagnosed to have this re-evaluated 8 years earlier. And primary pulmonary hypertension going on for 8 years is somewhat difficult. So that's what it didn't strike my mind. It was the answer. As you know, as high as the mortality could be as high as 50% by 4 years. But anyway, Dr. Jacob Joe said, you should know that we keep only rare cases in exam. So it was a very nice kind of feeling it was. And I passed the exam. So the final diagnosis was primary pulmonary hypertension, probably suprasystemic pulmonary hypertension, moderate size atrial septal defect, bidirectional flow, function class 2 to 3, controlled heart failure, and patient was in sinus rhythm. Now let us give me some more examples. Like in top physiology, clinically it's difficult to differentiate one from other. That is, somebody has a corrected TGA VSTPS, somebody has a tricuspid atresia PS, somebody has a classical TOF. Can you differentiate clinically? Answer is no. Except if it is a corrected transmission of greater arteries where because of the L post aorta, in the left second and third space, you may have palpable aorta. You should remember that long ejection murmur means mild cyanosis, short ejection murmur means severe cyanosis. Now in the top variants like pulmonary atresia, again it will be quiet pericardium, but continuous murmur is almost always there. If you have a quiet pericardium and continuous murmur in the front or back, hardly there is any diagnosis. The diagnosis is pulmonary atresia. The underlying congenital anatomy could be anything. The underlying congenital anatomy, again mitral atresia, again tricuspid atresia, single ventricle, whatever nonsense it could be. But there is pulmonary atresia. So quiet pericardium and continuous murmur, the clinical diagnosis is pulmonary atresia. In absent pulmonary syndrome, you have a very good ESM and EDM, but it's not seen in adults. Generally, by if it is not corrected by, say, in the second decade, generally they all will not survive. But pulmonary atresia surviving to adult is not very uncommon. Right now, I have at least some 4 or 5 patients of pulmonary atresia under my follow-up and not considering surgery. Let's give me one more example. It's a relatively asymptomatic 20-year-old child, 20-year-old man, saturation 82%, single second sound, 3/6 ESM. So this is very classical of tetralogy fellow. Now same, a 20-year-old man with significant dyspnea on exertion at 1 year. See here, I said asymptomatic 20-year-old child. With 82%, generally they remain asymptomatic. Now here I am telling significant dyspnea since 1 year, saturation 82%, single second sound, no murmur. Now can this be tetralogy of Fallot? Because tetralogy of Fallot, you will have a very good murmur. I said no murmur. But the saturation coming to 82 is giving him a significant dyspnea. Whenever there is a dyspnea, we should consider that there is something to do with the lungs. Either the lung is congested because of the left heart failure, or there is increased pulmonary pressure. And dyspnea is one of the consistent symptom of high pulmonary artery pressure. Okay. So with this history, with this short 4-liner history and clinical examination, one can always consider VSD with Eisenmenger syndrome. Of course, we are going to go further into it. But this 4-line, this 4 finding is enough one to consider VSD Eisenmenger syndrome. Now, what about this one? A 20-year-old child with significant dyspnea and existence is 1 year, saturation 82%, S2 wide but variable. How can the S2 be wide but variable? That means it's not ASD, but there is no murmur. So what diagnosis can we make? We can consider primary pulmonary hypertension, because in primary pulmonary hypertension, usually S2 is wide because RV is going to failure and the P2 closure is later. So like this, one can always discuss, or one can always remember to try to fix up some diagnosis clinically, and it is not very difficult if we go methodically. So to summarize my this short presentation, let us go for the age-based approach. Let us see what is the age of the patient and what is the possible congenital disease which can present at this age. Let us assess the physiological condition of the patient. Assess physiologically, is it a left to right shunt or right to left shunt? What about pulmonary blood flow increase or decrease? Is there cardiomegaly? What about H2? What about outflow murmur or AV valve regurgitation murmur? All these things will give us clue, and whatever the list I made, one or two things will definitely fit. Differentiate from PS, PH, or neither is there. For example, say Epstein's anomaly, or say corrected transposition mitral regurgitation. There is neither PH or nor PS. So go for age-based approach, do some physiological assessment, see whether there is PS or PH or neither, get the clues from chest X-ray and ECG. Obviously, when you consider doing echo, do echo, including a bubble study, which is very vital to diagnose conditions like, say, anomalous systemic veins draining into right atrium, or say pulmonary AV fistula. Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you for the patient listening.
So I think you all will agree that it was a great